Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. We're going to talk a little later about gold mining in Colorado. I'm looking forward to that one. But first, I still haven't gotten over the election. I'm grieving. Do you understand? I'm hurting. I'm dying inside. To help me process all this, a friend from Magellan Strategies, David Flaherty. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, John.
All right. I'm a wonk. I'm one of those freaky guys that lives on Colorado politics, so much more than national politics, because I believe that's how we save America, is by saving our home state.
Sure.
And I've seen weird stuff in Colorado. I've seen Republicans implode over and over and over and over.
It is a habit.
It is a habit. It's Caldara's first political axiom that there's nothing Republicans cannot screw up. I use a better word. This last election was not a blue wave around the country.
No, it was not.
In this state, it was a blue tsunami.
Absolutely.
And I'm still trying to put it together. What the hell happened? Usually, Coloradans vote split tickets. The AG will be a different guy than the governor. Or even on all four constitutional seats, governor, AG, secretary of state, treasurer, you know, they'll mix it up in these other seats
True.
or something. None of that.
No.
Democrats took hold of both sides of the legislature in large numbers.
Yes.
This ain't no purple state.
No, it is not.
This is a blue state. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely correct. Absolutely. The data shows that. This election was extraordinary, and it is much different than Republican losses like 2006, when it was the second term of President Bush. We had the Iraq War going on, and there were some significant losses that Republicans took in that cycle. But if you do a post-election survey and you ask them, why didn't you like the Republican Party or its candidates, you can say too conservative, too guns, too much party of no, they're just not willing to get along, go along. But we can pick up, dust ourselves off, and move along. Even though the following election in 2008 was not much better, we did have success in 2010 and in 2014. This election was different, though, because for the first time, turnout numbers for a midterm, the Republican Party, the Republican voters, did not have more voters turn out to vote than unaffiliated voters and Democrat voters. And this is a trend that's been going on since really the last 10 years, since December of 2008, where voter registration in the state is becoming more and more unaffiliate and less Democrat into less Republican. But those unaffiliated voters have never participated in a midterm election at the level that they did in 2018, to the point where a lot of Republican candidates simply didn't have the numbers to compete or the people to show up, even though it wasn't because Republicans didn't vote. They did. 71% of registered Republicans turned out to vote.
And how does that compare? 71% of registered Republicans came out.
Very good number for midterms.
Really?
Absolutely. Just as comparison, in 2014, the last midterm that we have, 69% of Republicans turned out to vote. Democrat Party, just as a comparison, in 2014, 59% of Democrats turned out to vote and 46% of unaffiliated voters. Fast forward to 2018, John, 71% of Democratic voters turned out to vote and 60% of unaffiliated voters turned out to vote. These are jumps in turnout that are unprecedented, and it's extraordinary. And if trends continue, the Republican Party may not actually have the numbers to compete in future statewide elections 4 years down the road, 6 years down the road.
Is it that the Republican Party is statistically on voter turnout, we're holding our own?
Right, but we lost our advantage that we've always had in these midterms.
But now the unaffiliated and Democrat voters are growing and growing and growing.
Mostly unaffiliated. Democrats are kind of flatlining, just so you know. They are not winning over hearts and minds, if you will. This is a classic midterm election where a lot of the unaffiliates turned out similar to 2010, where they were not pleased with the first term, the first 2 years of a presidential election. And historically, we all know a presidential first term, typically the opposite party, loses seats, gains seats in Congress and so forth. But this was really amplified. This is different because our numbers, we're not replenishing our numbers. Only basically 1 in 5 registered voters that are 44 and younger identify as a Republican, where half of them identify as unaffiliated. So,
and officially, I'm now unaffiliated. Given open primaries, I see no driving reason, unless I want to go into caucuses, and I've done that plenty of times.
Sure.
I see no real advantage for being registered. So I think we're turning into a unaffiliated state. That there'll still be a group on this side, there'll be a group on that side, and they'll both do R or D stuff.
Yep.
But Colorado's new model, because of the new laws, will be more and more unaffiliated voters. And that's harder for us to track if we just use party registration and not real analytics.
True, but if you go back and look at all of the voters that did switch to unaffiliated that were registered in the state in January of 2017, John, you'll find that approximately 50,000 former Republicans became unaffiliated and 50,000 Democrats became unaffiliated. Not very large numbers when you take into account each party has over 1 million, 1.1. Again, that's something that we're keeping an eye on, but it's not overwhelming because during this election, as we headed in and kind of watched the slow tsunami build from October 1st on when the ballots started being returned, you could clearly see that there was theories out there. Oh, there are Republicans hiding out in these unaffiliated numbers and everything's going to be all right. And that really was not the case.
When it came to the issues on the ballot,
Sure.
Colorado has candidates and then we have issues.
Mm-hmm.
The candidates, it was a tsunami. On candidates, we voted like California. It was a huge left, not a huge push to the left, not just towards Democrats. We've had Democrat governors, we've had Democrat legislators, but we haven't had hardcore social engineering progressives in control of both House and Senate and governor's office.
True.
So this is uncharted water. But at the same time, on those ballot questions, Coloradans voted like Coloradans. They voted against statewide tax increases twice.
Yes.
They voted against a debt package for transportation. They voted against a fracking ban called a fracking setback. They voted like Coloradans.
True.
What's the disconnect then between that vote on issues and their vote on candidates?
Well, I would just say this. We did about 7 or 8 focus groups throughout the election cycle, mostly with unaffiliated voters, and we would ask them, you're waiting longer to get to King Soopers, you're waiting longer in traffic. Aren't you going to support a tax increase? And we're talking to unaffiliated voters at different income levels and so forth. Nearly all of them said, no, I'm not going to support that. And I was like, why? And they're like, because of the cost of living, I may be making a little bit more money than I did 5 years ago, but the bottom line is I can't afford these things. And they have enough money, live within your budget. I'm not willing to approve that. The other thing is just a natural knee-jerk reaction still among Colorado voters, the unaffiliated voters that really decide our elections, when they read the ballot language, for example, of the education option, that says, shall taxes be raised by 1, 6, and then 10 zeros after, they're like, no way. There's still a skepticism out there.
They're still comfortable with that on a local level. They're not comfortable on a state level.
Definitely, absolutely. Because it passes the "what's in it for me" test. If I know that this tax increase, which I really am not thrilled to sign up for, but it's going to help my 2 kids that are in my public school system for a new school, a new road, or something, they will be more willing to consider it.
So, what was the difference between the questions and the candidates? Is it just that they could see what's in it for me here, and they really wanted wholesale change over there? Because they're going to get a whole bunch of stuff that they're not going to like. I think.
Look, our post-election survey of unaffiliated voters that participate in the election, we asked them, what do you like or dislike about the Republican Party? What do you like or dislike about the Democratic Party? Okay? And the bottom line is that you have open-ended verbatim saying, the Republicans are the party I hate. They are a party that I cannot stand. And we do this for the last 4 cycles. That kind of description of just what a Republican is has never been so low and so depressing in all of my years doing research in Colorado. That in itself, and then also look, whether you like it or not, 1 out of 3 unaffiliated voters were less likely to vote for Republican because of Donald Trump's negative influence and just...
Let me dive into that.
Sure.
So I'm seeing that the demographics of Colorado are changing. The Colorado I grew up in, a liberty-loving state, is turning into California as they're pouring in, not only from California, but from eastern big government states, and that's just the norm. They're comfortable with that. Even if they're running away from the policies, they're acclimated to it. So I get that. How much of this was that factor versus the Trump factor? And I know that's a vagary, but how much it was anything that looks like Trump, has the same Republican label after it like Trump, we're not going to do.
It was significant among the unaffiliated voters. There's no doubt about it. Our polling shows that. That really turned him off. It's his behavior. It's the negativity. It's him attacking and picking fights with everybody around him, whether it be, Robert Mueller and the investigations or his own expert on European policy. I mean, they just see it and they're like, enough's enough. It's like the behavior yesterday, to be honest with you, saying I'm going to shut down the government over building a wall. Unaffiliated voters, that is not a priority for them. And they see that, and it's just, look, I can live with not having an agreement with the president on a certain policy issue, but...
And that's a Colorado thing, where you go to another
it's an
red state.
Yes, in a red state, correct. That is not an issue. But based on our elections and who decides them, the unaffiliated voters really are driving the bus.
Let me ask you some specific races. Mike Kaufman was supposed to lose this year, and then the next year, and then the next year he's supposed to lose, and the next cycle. Man, he is going down, and he always pulled it out because he works so hard. He's connected with his community.
Absolutely.
He learns to speak Spanish. He is there with every immigrant group at the most basic level. I mean, he works it.
Yes.
And he's always fought back when he was supposed to lose.
Yes.
He's also pushed against Trump.
Yes.
And I think, he knew that thing would not fly in his district.
Yep.
So he pushed against Trump. Was it Trump? Plain and simple, did Mike Kaufman lose because of Trump, even though he tried to distance himself?
I will say this, if Hillary Clinton had won the election and she was our president, Mike Kaufman would very likely still be in office. You would not have had the turnout that we had for Mike to try to overcome, because, look, that's a big part of it. I mean, look at our state Senate districts, just for example. We had losses at a margins of 10,000 votes, which is unprecedented. Double-digit losses, okay? Mike Kaufman also got caught up in that, unfortunately, in his district. And as much as he tried to distance himself from Trump and call out the president when he thought he was wrong and support him when he was right, it was the surge of Democrats and unaffiliated voters and Jason Crow running a decent enough campaign compared to some former challengers, making the case why he would be a better representative for them than Mike. And Mike unfortunately just could not overcome those things. And that is how we looked what happened in the 6th district, in a tough district.
Let's bring it to the statewide.
Sure.
The one that puzzles me is Wayne Williams, a guy who did his job masterfully. I mean, he was Secretary of State. He did his job. He's recognized nationally for it. And doing the job of Secretary of State is really not a partisan job when you get down to it. You run the elections, you run the office, you file the forms, you do this stuff. He was endorsed by every single paper in the state, except for one alternative weekly in Boulder.
Yes.
And if he ran the most effective campaign a guy in that position could,
with the resources that he had,
which I don't think going to one more breakfast would have changed anything.
Sure.
Was that also Trump?
Yes, it was the environment, and it was also, if you look at all the down ballot races, he was running against the only female on the ticket, period, out of all the 4 down ballots. And I think there is something to be said that a large swath of unaffiliated voters wanted to vote for a woman, even though Gina and her qualifications and the quality of her campaign work, she had $500,000. She had some serious cash to spend. But at the end of the day, I think the reason he lost by 200,000 votes compared to Attorney General candidate George Brocco losing by 160,000 and Brian Watson losing by 180,000, I believe. He probably had 20 to 30,000 votes against him simply because he was running against a female. And that really drove a lot of these unaffiliated women to the ballot, as well as, I would argue, suburban Republican women, said, you know what, I'm just not happy with some of the behavior of the president, and that's in there too, and that's undeniable.
I believe if Walker Stapleton ran a perfect campaign, which I don't think he did, but I think if he did, it wouldn't have changed the outcome much at all. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're not. I would agree with you. I think even if it was a well-run campaign with a more defined message, and if, honestly, the arguments against Jared Polis with his 10-year voting record in Congress had been more apparent to voters, even then I do think Walker still would have lost. I think anybody would have lost. You know what I mean?
Is that because Jared put in $20 to $30 million of his own money, besides however many millions of years before, setting up infrastructure, or was it Trump? Which one? I know they both were effective, but which one?
No, I don't think it was as much Trump. And I absolutely, you can't deny Jared's investment in the overall. He completely carried and created a Democrat operation that lifted all of their votes, and that's part of the story too. tough to quantify exactly how much. But I'll take this away. He won by 10 points and spent $30 million. I'm pretty optimistic for that. Why didn't he win by 15 points? And I think it does show all the money in the world, executing perfectly, running against a weak candidate like Walker Stapleton, who really did not define why he wanted to be governor and what he was going to do for Coloradans, where Jared was very much, if you read our unaffiliated surveys, post-election survey verbatims, he came across as more competent. He talked about the issues that he cared about, such as education, lowering the cost of health care. He had a clearly defined issue. Plus, he had a business background, and he came across as more competent, where it seems that Walker Stapleton's campaign never really laid out a vision on any of the issues other than just Jared Polis is going to be extremely liberal and so forth.
Last question before we break. What do we need to do differently? You're looking at Republicans, and they want to win back House or Senate or something.
Sure.
Give me, in a nutshell, what is the one thing that will move the lever the most?
Number one, we've got to stop the bleed of our voter registration. I'm not saying we invest in massive voter registration. It's still going to be tough because, look, the Republican Party doesn't have the greatest image rating right now. And we can't avoid living and being members of the Republican Party with Donald Trump being the head of it. He just turns people away from,
in this
time and time again. Yes, in this state, and these unaffiliated voters. But I think it needs to get away from rhetoric, perhaps regarding political ideology and conservative thought, and it needs to be more about problem solving. What is your problem with education? I think teachers need to have more pay. We need to acknowledge that is something that we're going to work towards, and that we have a better idea of how to achieve that without taking money out of your pocket and creating big government, which...
So I'm hearing two things. One, we got to change the infrastructure so that more Republicans are registered and compared to Democrats and unaffiliated. That's a mechanical thing.
That is a mechanical
thing.
Very
expensive to do.
And not easy
in
this
environment. And then on the messaging side, we got to say...
Talk more about issues that are relevant to unaffiliated voters.
Thank you so much. I hate all pollsters. You understand this.
Of course.
They tell me things I just don't want to hear.
I know.
David Flaherty, stay tuned.